Watch this video with our virtual reality glasses for smartphone. virtualvizor.com.
Storytelling panel, everyone live. And I guess the future of panel now that being filmed in VR, 3D. This is, I'm kind of loving that. I'm just going to acknowledge that. So I'm Gordon Bellamy. I'll be your moderator. I'm at USC. I'm also with a VR startup called The Wave, which is the democratizing live music. And let the gentlemen of our panel introduce themselves, starting with Eden Chen.
Hey, I'm Eden. I work at Fisherman Labs. We make game development, website development. We do a lot of app development, emerging tech. We just launched, or helped launch, Sony's Ghostbusters VR about a week and a half ago, and worked on with Qualcomm, NBC, a lot of other companies on VR. So, well, happy to be here, and yeah.
Thank you, Jake.
Jake Dorn. I'm with Main Path Marketing down in San Diego. Also work closely with Fisherman Labs. Previously was at WPP and kind of come from the emerging tech world.
Hi everybody, I'm Jim. I work for a company called FOLKLORE. We do digital product development, a lot of industrial and interface design for companies like Verizon, as well as VR experiences for a lot of the studios here in Hollywood. So super excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Peter. I've been directing VR for 4 years, which makes me a veteran apparently. So we've been doing, started out doing 360 videos. I have one of the 10 most watched videos on YouTube, 360, which gives you a sense of scale. It's only 8 million views, but that's a lot in VR terms. And yeah, I tell stories with VR.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kenyon. I'm with Furious M. Furious M is a VR development company. We have a platform for managing VR and enhancing user experience. And to begin our process, we began working with production companies, and specifically live action productions in VR. Defrost is the first project that we're associated with, and we'll talk about that later.
Cool, and this, of course, service to you, so if you have questions along the way, just, let us know, raise your hand. That's what we're here for. But let's begin with skepticism. There's a bit of skepticism around storytelling in VR, yet here we are on the leading edge of it. Why don't we talk a little about that? I'll start with you, Eden. Talk about some of the skepticism people are expressing.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't normally be in a conversation about storytelling because I come from a game development background. So games traditionally tell stories by using something called cutscenes. So like you'll be in a game, you guys probably played a game before, and they'll take you out of the cutscene into like a story, and then you'll go back and play the game again. And now we're at the stage where we have kind of a convergence of Hollywood and gaming in a lot of ways with VR. So you have VR, which tells stories live, much like a game does, and then you have traditional storytelling or cinematic storytelling, which tells stories retrospectively. So the problem with that in some ways is that as the person in the VR experience, a lot of times you start thinking, what does the maker want me to do? Which is a problem, So that's something I just want to kind of throw out there, just to maybe start this off and start the conversation of how we can combat things like that. There should be a natural storytelling when we tell stories in VR, so the user shouldn't be thinking, what should I be doing in this process? They should be thinking, they shouldn't be thinking at all, they should just be immersed in the experience.
That's a good point. Jump in there.
Yeah, I think there's a skepticism that sort of revolves around the difference between traditional content production and really the possibilities within VR. I don't think anybody's even scratched where this all goes. So there's just this natural, like, well, is it really going to be like this? And the answer is no. And what will it be? And the answer is I don't know. And that just inherently clouds vision for people. So I think that's sort of what we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. You may talk a little about the taxonomy that's forming. You know what? Even better question. How long do you keep people in right now? How long a story are you even allowed to tell nowadays? 5 minutes, 30 seconds?
Depends if they throw up or not, I guess.
No, but
that's one of the things.
Sure, but I'm just like, what is even the framing now for what you're able to do?
It really depends on the setting, but we did curate the U.S. experience for VR at Next at the Cannes Film Festival, where we had 37 minutes of continuous VR viewed on Samsung Gears by approximately 45 people, and nobody threw their headset off and no one got sick. So we know that that's possible. I also know of a new movie.
4 people exploded though.
Actually, it was
If there's anybody from Samsung here, I'm kidding. I have one. I'm sorry.
So, yeah, actually, we don't know what the upward limits are, and I think that I've heard that there are people that have stayed in VR for over days. So.
I mean, right now, typically on average, we're seeing like, at least on the game side, about like at most 5-minute experiences. If you look at like the Star Wars experience that came out, that's like probably like 2 to 3 minute experience. And that's like on the longer side.
Super limited by hardware, and you know, just the state of the entire device ecosystem is so nascent. It's akin to like hauling around, you know, those big gray cell phones that had the cord. I mean, it's really at that stage right now. So, you know, to say what's possible today is sort of like saying where will mobility go in 1987? I don't know.
How about you, Peter? What are you doing?
Well, actually, I read about the first feature-length VR film, 112 minutes.
Whoa. Tell us more.
Which I've not tried. I'm not sure if I actually want to try it. It's about Jesus. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
Jesus.
I didn't remember that conference like a year and a half ago. It's actually done.
It's
done.
done. Yeah, and no one's seen it, so.
But I heard it was like Passion of the Christ.
It actually-
like it's going to be like rawr.
Yeah, it just
full on.
debuted at the Venice
At
Film
Venice,
Festival.
yeah.
Yeah, so
But only 40 minutes.
only 40 minutes.
A teaser for the.
It's easy, yeah. I actually edited a video in Oculus, so I had an Oculus on and was sitting next to the editor, and I kind of completely forgot about time. So I was in there for 4 hours, and literally when I took the headset off, I was cross-eyed, right? Because the parallax on it was a stereoscopic 3D video for Ring on Montaigne. My eyes just started moving in naturally. So I had the biggest headache ever, having come out of that. So
Kind of
I
the
don't
Oppie
recommend
grab?
Being in it, yeah, it was.
No.
So that was bad, but people are talking about, you know, with PlayStation VR just launching last week, people will have those headsets on all day, you know. So there's no
Or
feedback.
will they? I mean, maybe it doesn't work like that. If they
It's
have it
kind
there.
it shouldn't work
Twice.
like that, but
You know,
it
I
will.
saw something on Reddit. There was a guy who just took a picture of his roommate from like 12 midnight to 6 in the morning every 30 minutes, and he
Yeah.
just has it on the whole time, and he's just degrading in his like physical state, and by the end he's just laying there, sort of. But yeah, there's definitely the
It's up to technology to make this better, cleaner, faster, and it will happen. And it's happening at a remarkable pace at this point. And I think within, you know, this time next year, you're going to see vast improvements over what's out there.
I think that's also where some of the skepticism comes in, though, because VR has been talked about, this emerging technology, for the last 4 years, and I think it's almost got kind of the dipping dots, which is the ice cream of the future. There's only so long you can be the ice cream of the future.
Yes.
So I think that's where it's healthy.
Yeah.
Skepticism. I think we actually had
I
a
just want
question.
You know, you've got full body VR where people are running around and lifting their arms up and dancing for 20 minutes until their heart gives out.
Running on
in their
treadmills,
eyes.
yeah, all of that
Versus
stuff's possible.
360 VR, which is as long as your eyes hold out or the device doesn't cause you to pass out because it's too hot. So it's 2 different time limits happening on 2 different types of platforms.
Yeah, we should probably make a distinction between the types of VR, because obviously everyone lumps it all together, but there's 360, which is probably what most people have seen using cameras. GoPro kind of adaptations, Samsung 360. But then where we're all moving right now is what we call VR is more of an immersive experience. So that could be room scale VR, which is HTC Vive, Sony PlayStation, Oculus, where you can actually physically move around a 60 square foot space. And that's completely different model of production and storytelling from GoPro. So I think we need to kind of almost define the types of VR we're actually discussing.
Can I throw a third, which would be AR storytelling? And I just thought about if you ever told a kid a bedtime story, right? I sort of imagine a world where AR storytelling, where you could both see, the pop-up book, as it were, would be another important, where people can do it. We're doing it together versus a solitary experience.
Yeah, that actually becomes the true edge of storytelling right now, that interactivity, the ability to incorporate mobile devices and to do so elegantly so that you are trying to achieve that authentic experience of creating presence in an artificial environment. If you can, that's the goal, right, of VR. And whatever the technology is, whatever the camera device, the capture device, the CG device, all of that stuff becomes, it's amorphous and it's going to change.
So what sort of must-see now? I mean, you are living at the edge of storytelling right now, so besides, of course, Jesus VR, what more secular works are also available to people? Has everyone here have VR? Let's start with raise your hand if you have VR, just on a sense of who has it. Oh, interesting. Raise your hand if you do not have VR.
Does everybody here have a cell phone? Then you have VR.
Yeah.
So maybe define that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
VR versus a headset device versus.
Yeah. So across those different media, like what should people be looking at now to be at the edge of storytelling?
Yeah, I'm going to throw this out there. This is one of the reasons that skepticism exists, is that there is no killer app nor killer production for VR yet. What we've seen is essentially it really is like the new art of B content, B filmmaking. It's very much startup driven. There really hasn't been a lot of weight put into these productions yet in terms of budget, in terms of activity from the studios in earnest. Everybody seems to be sort of playing around with this technology, and the reason is because consumer adoption is low. So as consumer adoption starts to go up, you're going to start to see these productions get more akin to what people expect, both in terms of games and film and TV and movies, and then you'll start to see a lot more important content showing up on in this format. But right now, like in terms of what's out there to see, it's all sort of like Star Wars, right? There's Star Wars, the cinematic universe, and then there's Star Wars VR. Star Wars VR is all of 5 minutes of, like what are you going to do with that?
So the coming barrage of original content will probably start appearing at the end of next year.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of features and mostly episodics that are being funded currently, so we're going to see a higher quality of content. But it's going to be depending upon access and the democratization of VR, if you will, and how audiences can embrace that. Mobile devices are going to play a huge role, and even though right now most mobile devices are focused on 360, you can actually do higher quality VR-like experiences using mobile devices. So we think that's one of the best ways to start telling stories to reach the world.
It's also like kind of a chicken and egg issue, as like any emerging technology is, on like content versus technology versus consumer adoption. And I think like just to give you to answer your question, there's PSVR that just came out. There's the Vive that you can buy for $800, but you need like probably like a $2,000 computer to run that. And then you have Oculus and mobile as well. So that's like your landscape. But for us, we used to make mobile games, and we stopped making mobile games proprietarily, at least, because there was too much competition out there, too many indie developers out there, there were thousands of games coming out every single day, and it was very, very expensive to acquire users. We started doing VR game development about 6 months ago, and working on proprietary experiences because there wasn't a lot of a lot of competition. So that's where it becomes interesting, because developers like us are starting to work on VR because we see that there's not a lot of competition out there, and there's a huge opportunity because of the consumer.
Are you focused on adaptation or focused on creating original works inside of the medium?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. And a lot of it has to do with like what incentive do we as developers have to work on something in new technology. So it has to be either there's like less competition and we see that consumer adoption is coming, and I think those things are true with VR, which makes it exciting.
So in the back, when we talked a bit about direction, what it meant to be a director of content, creator of content, and point this back to you, Peter, I'd love to talk about that, and I'd also love to talk about, I guess, the part B will be the emergence of a lingua franca for viewers, right? And even to know how to view, if that's what you even call it, whatever the verb is going to be to I don't know, whatever that verb is, to watch and enjoy this content.
I mean, we were discussing backstage, the big difference in directing VR is that you can't be on set. You can't be behind the camera anymore. So you're not directing the actor, you're not directing the subject, because you'd be in the shot. You'd be 180 of that shot. So the biggest challenge I found directing VR is not being there. So you have to kind of, we're saying it's more like stage directing. So it's like directing a play. You have to choreograph the actors, tell them what to do, and then leave. And been in the most weird vantage points. I've been up trees, in caves, hiding in a little monitor. I mean, it's so bizarre, and the actors are like, have no idea what's going on. So,
Now, did you come from theater? Like, how did you prepare yourself for that? Are you learning in the trade?
I'm so not prepared for that. I'm from a documentary background, so, and I think it's worth mentioning that, you know, some of the biggest successes right now in terms of storytelling is from documentary. I think all the United Nations stuff is incredible. Being able to have the POV of a child in Syria is probably one of the most, you know, powerful uses of VR to date. So I think, you know, those types of situations where something real is happening and you're putting a camera in the center of it and giving you a point of view on that is incredibly impactful. I think the scripted VR needs to catch up. That's as we were saying, there's not so much of that right now, and that's again due to the fact there's no monetization. None of this content, incidentally, is selling. I've probably made the only piece of VR that we sold, which is for Sports Illustrated. So I wouldn't even classify that storytelling, but we sold each piece of that content for $1.99. But most of this stuff is available freely, and that's also limiting the amount of stories that are being told right now, because, you know, if you can't sell it, who's paying for it?
We're going to drill a little deeper for everyone who's not familiar with what you... Tell them about what you made for Sports Illustrated.
So we actually were asked to just convert the magazine into VR. They were like, let's do a shoot and create that in 360. So of course I tried to make it a bit more complicated because it's what I tend to do. So we shot using plates. So I actually shot using two different camera systems. I used a GoPro system where we actually just captured the...
Does everyone know what plates are? You know what it means? Tell them what you mean.
So essentially, you shoot one plate at a time. So there's 4 quadrants in VR. So you basically just shoot them individually and stitch them together later. So that actually does allow you to be behind the camera, which is helpful. I did a music video for the New York Times for a band called Run the Jewels, and we shot it individually. So I had the same actors in each frame. So we had a before and after story going on. So depending on which way you looked, you could get an interpretation of the same story. So it's the same story playing out in real time from 4 directions, before and after. So that was, you know, that was probably the most advanced form of storytelling that we've used in VR. But there's a million forms of narrative in film that apply to VR. You know, there's a Catherine Bigelow film called Strange Days that I would love to do in VR, which is entirely about point of view experience. You know, there's Strange Days, shortcuts, there's multiple narratives playing out simultaneously, Magnolia. So there's a ton of lessons to be learned from Hollywood filmmaking, but right now the budget's on there to actually make these things.
So it seems like you're sort of starting to touch on having rewatchability, like a reason for people to return to VR content, and I guess in a way that's trying to give agency to the viewer. So maybe talk a little about that, about the emergence of agency of the viewer or the participant, or whatever you call them, in your VR storytelling.
With Defrost, it was conceptualized as an episodic, so there are actually 12 episodes. And you start out with the first-person point of view as a cryogenically frozen woman who's resuscitated 30 years later. And the person is actually in a wheelchair. Our director took on the role of being the person that pushes the wheelchair. Randall Kleiser directed it, and so he envisioned this world where he would simply be a non-participant in the story, but he's right there, able to direct Carl Weathers and Bruce Davidson and some of the other actors who are very professional, but still had a little bit of guidance. So because it's an episodic, there are going to be hooks in each episode to bring people back. But with Defrost, we're able to drive that concept of achieving presence through the point of view perspective and having the individual take on that role of the character. And we use the term user because sound is as important as viewing. And if you can incorporate sound into that perspective, it works 90% better than having non-directional sound or lack of.
All the way down the line, I want to hear what you think. Agency of the user? What's the term? Yeah, even what the term is. What is the, what do
Yeah,
you call
I
someone
mean-
who comes to one of the shows?
Agency, you can't really have agency just shooting with a video camera, because this agency is interactive, right? So this is more of a game engine world. So you would have to, and there's not so much of this going on right now, but there's a lot of that kind of interactive narrative game engine stuff going into video. But I think when it's going to get really interesting is when you volumetrically capture the characters and apply AI to them. So they can actually respond to you, they can look at you, they know you're in the room. I think that's what we're talking about with agency. I hate VR when someone's not looking at you, but they're talking kind of slightly off-center, and it disconnects you, takes you out of the experience.
It's kind of a lean-back observational experience more than achieving that. One of the things that Randall used in Defrost was the capability of having this person in a wheelchair, so when we're displaying it at some festivals, we'll actually see people in wheelchair and actually use sense of scented hospital and some of those things. And we actually had some people having difficulty getting out of the wheelchair when they were finished. They can't move, they were frozen.
Kind of doubling down on some of the concepts that they touched on. One of the things that we've been working on for the last year and a half is a multidimensional database to serve content up within VR based on emotional and biometric input. So we've got a system that uses off-the-shelf EEG monitors and biometric monitors tied to an entirely new way to categorize and content or apply taxonomy to content. So what we're doing is trying to develop a system for gauging affinity or emotional reaction to content within an experience, and then changing that based on what we're seeing on the fly. And that's, if you want to leap very far forward into what VR becomes, it is a convergence of game mechanics and inputs that puts the user into an entirely different position. It's essentially taking away fixed narrative and changing it to more of a sandbox mentality, which is some of the things that we're trying to do already. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think going back to our earlier comments about the gaming industry in Hollywood and the collision that's happening and juxtaposing those two against each other, I think we have to lean more towards the gaming industry and towards the ability of the user or the audience to be fully immersed and really have their own free will throughout the production versus the director trying to steer.
Yeah, we threw out like open world gaming, like Metal Gear Solid 5 and Red Dead Redemption and some of these things, right? They're very much the litmus for what we'll be seeing in the future. And I think people that have already begun to grasp that are working on those concepts. That's some of the stuff that'll be coming out over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, even in the current environment, what the most successful games have done is remove all human faces, if you've noticed, and part of the problem is that we're not there yet. So the human brain has a very astute ability to tell whether a smile is a genuine smile or not a genuine smile. So if you look at like the Star Wars experience, for example, they don't have you don't see any human faces. You just see
Totally on purpose.
stormtroopers, and you see robots, and all the great experiences.
Has anyone out there seen Stars? Does anyone know what he's talking? Okay, just one second.
Yeah.
So I mean, you say early adoption is not being adopted yet. No one knows. No one knows.
Yeah.
There will be no faces.
Yeah, but all the best experiences, you won't see human faces yet. So that is in the future where where we will be able to interact with AI, but we're not kind of there
Well,
yet.
now I know what I want to know. I want to know about multi-user storytelling, about co-present storytelling in VR.
Yeah, Facebook did a demo I think about a year ago where you could throw paint at your friends and stuff like that. I don't know if anyone messed around with that.
But I almost want like room, using thing where we could be in different places in the story, like literally different places, because we've taken our room scale and teleported,
I mean, that's exactly what they're working on, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they made the acquisition.
Yeah.
Honestly, Facebook bought VR to do that. They want to take the user base, they want to remove them from the website and put them in a virtual environment so that they can react on a different plane, or interact on a different plane.
World premiere.
Honestly, it's not that complicated to look at what they're doing and say, wow, that's where this goes. The reality is, though, that it'll take a while. I mean, it's just going to be another 10 years before we see that kind of stuff firing off. But then, you know, that's why there's people already doubling down and investing in things like virtual reality addiction and stuff like that. Because we're going to see like a complete altering of the human condition when stuff like, why the hell would you want to go work at McDonald's when you can be like the emperor of the universe?
Yeah,
I'm literally never going to move.
there are definitely ethical considerations. When you think of child entertainment, if
Yeah.
you're gearing the subject matter to children, it's great, but if you're gearing the subject matter to adults and children get a hold of that, you can create cognitive chaos at that point because you're really affecting the brain. And once again, back to DeFrost, we're actually creating these environments where people are wondering whether or not that actually occurred to them. We're creating an autobiographical memory within that experience, and it's a cognitive reality at that point. You can go back. So for a child to be able to experience some of these things becomes amazing.
Wow.
And you got to ask yourself, how are we going to control that?
The police state, because now what you brought up is the thought of how do you rate and control and limit the content people, because right now it's a bit of the wild east and west, right, where you can get what you want and just click on it, right? So what do you think? Tell us the future of the limiting of storytelling as you see it.
I think AR is probably more pressing to that, because at least in VR, you know, you can't really move. It blocks off the world. But in AR, you can have an AR glasses on all day. You can be looking at things. No one knows even what you're looking at. I mean, we did up to Magic Leap a few times, and I'm not allowed to talk about them because they have encyclopedic NDA.
Here, wait, let's ask a question. Better or worse than Pokemon Go?
Oh, no, it's better than that.
Oh, okay, there you go. There's something.
But the AR, that kind of AR is going straight into your optical nervous system, and you're receiving it like a memory. You know, so this is totally different. It's not a screen. You know, everything else you're looking at is off a screen. It's a cinema, a phone. VR is essentially a phone near your eye. AR is going straight into your brain. So that is really, on a cognitive level, just a whole different ballgame.
So the Microsoft HoloLens will probably be available slightly before Magic Leap becomes available, but Magic Leap stands to set a new bar for, there's going to be new law that's going to have to be created around this. It's going to be amazing.
You say new laws?
New laws that will be related to
Well,
augmented reality.
so listen, that's what he's saying is that, and this is like a totally different subject than VR, but
Sure.
the advent of the augmented human condition via information is upon us with augmented reality. So when you think about, like, my son's a swimmer, right, and he's in the pool and he's banging away at a huge long distance race, right? He doesn't know what's going on around him. It's a very solitary sport. So the kids that succeed in that sport have this inner voice that says push hard, right?
Yeah.
It's a sixth sense that special people have. They have it in public speaking, they have it in nursing, they have it in basketball, right? Some people are just good at things because they have a special power, right? That's about to be taken away.
Democratization
And
of special powers.
sold as apps, and that's the future of augmented reality. So like data and intuition and reaction time and all. So the very first kid that shows up to a soccer match with these special glasses on,
Yeah.
right? What does that do to the sport? It changes everything. So to think that there won't be legislation is completely head in the sand.
Absolutely, you will begin affecting cognitive reality. This will replace Adderall as the next best thing to college performance.
Wow.
Wait, you have Adderall?
AR is better than Adderall. That's a very strong statement. So you're saying big pharma could be up against our industry? We'll
Absolutely.
slow down
No, I mean
progression.
pulling biochemical triggers
Legalized AR.
pulling biometric triggers via chemicals is almost is going to be changed fundamentally because of the placebo effect of AR. Because the human mind can do a lot of things that we haven't quite realized yet. So like getting rid of your headache, things like this. You don't have to use a drug to mask that. AR and VR therapy could very well help with that. PTSD, all kinds of diseases are already being treated with the power of the mind. There was a study, so these burn victims in Philadelphia, the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, that they would have to have their bandages changed, and they would have, it's obviously one of the most painful things you can go through. They started putting VR on these kids with soothing snow scenes, and 60% of them used less opiates during that process.
Wow.
So the amount of painkillers that they needed was reduced because of their state of mind.
So this sounds like we're getting closer now to the future of storytelling.
Well-
right? Because these are actually these experiences.
Yeah.
If I have that, if I'm a swimmer kid and I have that, and you've got, I don't know, effing Star Wars, it's gonna be over because I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna make you just feel better for 30 minutes.
The real term might become story experiencing, even though it's kind of doesn't flow right off the tongue. But the idea that you're no longer telling a story, but enabling someone to experience that, and that their mind is in fact neurologically processing in the same way you process reality. So that's probably the biggest edge that we're going to be coming on, and companies like Magic Leap will be building stories in AR, and the production companies that come from that. We're still 10 years off from that, but VR has been around since 1963, or since the first person discovered a headset could actually transform what they're looking at. And 30 years ago, people were professing that AR was on the precipice. 20 years ago, then 10, but it's here finally. And the commoditization of headsets, I think, is going to happen. You'll see it over this holiday season. Sony, unfortunately, Samsung's going to take a little bit of a breather, but you'll see
hoverboard.
plenty of ads from Google coming out, so stay tuned.
I'm sorry, just visceral for me. The energy when you all talk about AR is different than when you talk about VR. I don't know if you can tell. Like when you start, you guys light up.
VR is
I'm
environmental
super curious.
displacement. Augmented reality is, again, it's an altering of the human condition. So like going away and escaping into a new reality, I don't think many people are all that fundamentally interested in it, though it will be awesome. But when I say like, hey, like if anybody, has anybody ever seen the video Sight? It's a short film done by these guys out of Finland, and it's about this guy who goes on a date with a woman, fires up a dating app, and he just takes her down like there's no tomorrow, right? Because he says all the, like, my superpowers have been taken away, right? Like I worked really hard to be able to do that, and now this guy just puts on a headset and knows when she's reacting right and knows when she's reacting wrong. And that to me that's way more exciting. People are going to buy that like no tomorrow.
But the duels between people trying to manipulate each other, that's going to be the real like next level. Like
Why you got that software will be more expensive. You'll get upgrades.
Yeah, and I think from a platform perspective, people have talked about VR as the next platform. What's next after mobile? And I think it's actually AR. And I think that's why people.
Sure.
So along the lines of the snow thing, the opposite of that is, would people be able to feel something painful? Because pain is controlled by your mind. So if it's really that invasive and believable,
Sure,
that's
of course.
Horror movies.
Yeah, I mean that's.
would you actually feel the sensation? Because
Have you? Okay, so everyone's done VR. Like I've already had a thing where you touch a candle in VR and you just in your mind you sort of like you felt something.
That's real.
Right? So yeah.
But that's being combined with technology like hypersonic sound being used to sort of create a facsimile of touch. So there's like people using sound to create the feeling of touching a hologram or things touching you. But yeah, to your point, like in VR, if you've ever like done the, when you're not sure if something is around you and there was nothing there, it's because your mind is extremely powerful.
yeah, because I've had that, not to sound crazy, like in a dream where I woke up and my hand was tingling where I was cut, which is frightening. But what you're saying with the snow, like if that is a possibility, there's going to be regulation on that. Right?
Good versus evil.
Yeah, great power
So-
building.
And we all know how well regulation works. No problem.
But I mean, there's a market for everything. So people that want to experience VR pain, I'm pretty sure that'll be a big thing on like a. I don't even want to talk about where
We're
that
going to
goes.
talk about the importance of AR boarding.
Truly, we were able, with DeFrost, we were able to have a few people achieve that level of agency, the presence, if you will, that they felt paralyzed sitting in a wheelchair.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, think of hypnosis, right? How powerful is your mind? And people, if you can.
No, wait, first don't apologize. We're here for you.
Okay.
What's your question?
Okay, so I work with special needs children, autistic children. Could the AR be used in something? Because autistic children have problems like connecting with emotions.
Yeah, that's right.
Can it?
It's a great app.
Can it
You should
be
do
used
that.
to kind of like teach them?
Go build
at least face expression, kind of like feel some empathy.
Absolutely.
towards-
Absolutely.
So
Why not?
So the term or the phrase, if you will, is that VR is an empathy machine. It's pretty common.
Chris Milk said that.
Yeah. Well, actually,
Roger Ebert did,
Yeah.
not Phil.
yeah. It-
But, I'm just gonna comment that, the same panel took place around television in 1958.
That's a really good point,
So-
actually.
Well, thanks.
But this time you're all here. Our history people. I was
So,
going to
but
ask
absolutely,
Regulation.
I think
And
that
time to think about it.
managing
Correct.
spectrum disorders of all types can be affected by using highly effective virtual reality and augmented reality and trained professionals that understand that. And we're actually working with a neuroscientist out of Switzerland that's using our defrost show to do testing as to how people can feel presence, whether it does it this way, that way, doing A/B testing and some of the other things. So you're going to see a lot more. USC is focused on it, Stanford's focused on it. We're going to see other schools becoming much more user-friendly with VR and incorporating it in part of their...
Yeah, super interesting about the spectrum becoming sort of like maybe like vision or hearing, right? Where it became transformed by technology and is not such a big deal anymore, where we might not think of the spectrum in the same way, with these sorts of tools. I just a quick question about defrost, about the experience of people who actually were in wheelchairs, maybe who tried it versus people who were not. I'm super curious about that. Did you do any, like, were people who actually were legitimately paralyzed tried your story?
Yeah, you have to be sitting down.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, I mean,
That's, yeah. No, I'm asking, did you ever have people who were physically differently
No,
able?
you're asking a cool
Yeah.
question.
Try it.
People who are actually paralyzed.
Oh,
Mario.
No.
Yeah, Mario's
Not
actually
yet.
administers these experiments, so.
No, we haven't had anyone who's actually physically.
I did defrost at the DGA, and I'm one of those people who buys into the experience, and it was really compelling, and I did feel like I was, immersed in that world. Yeah, it was very interesting.
Probably the only example that is very anecdotal is Randall Kleiser had a friend of his who had recently had a stroke, and he was about 2 minutes into it and threw the headset and literally threw it at the wall and broke it. He ripped it off and said, "I can't watch this. This is too painful." This woman doesn't achieve a stroke in the scene, but it's very similar to that feeling.
There you go. No, it's your turn, for sure.
I just want to say those exact things like I know, what they're doing, and even in what was old virtual worlds or old virtual reality, there's been lots of studies and lots of things with people who were paralyzed, people who couldn't walk,